There we go. Oh.
How are we doing? Shabbat Shalom. I wish. I wish I were prepared for enough for a lot of Chazanit. At some point. Yeah. What's one? I was trying to think. Was it Ganshoff or Roosevelt? Which? So I was learning. I can't sing like Kusevitsky. No, not him, but yeah. Okay. Wow. Give me a second. Let me see what I have on here. I think I had. I'm loving it. Let's see if I can find it. I think maybe it was Jacob Rappaport. I think it might have been Jacob Rappaport. I had a Hashkiyuna by him, and I'm trying to see if I can't find it on here for some reason. But I'm pretty sure I had, because that's Kachko. I have a Kachko unpublished, but I don't have it. Maybe I have it memorized at some point. I'm gonna look for that for you at some point. I want to look for that.
So it's at this point, it's like he can do it, but deciding that he actually wants to do it seems to be the greater challenge. He's like, well, he's figured out every other way to walk. Walks on his knees. He does the scooting thing. He does all this stuff. That I can draw a direct line to, like the Av. That is for sure. So I just remembered what I said last week, which is, and Kevin didn't talk about,
At some point, I could probably get you that. I have Jacob Rappaport as sung by Moshe Ganshoff. So Kusevitsky is one of the few that I really haven't. Any of the Kusevitsky brothers, I actually haven't done a lot of research on. I've done more on some of the others. Yeah. And not Jacob. David.
Okay.
I'll have to look it up.
Would anybody like to light Shabbat candles tonight? Since we're going to try to bring back that tradition. Anybody up for that? Anybody? Anybody want to light? No, Roman, you up for it? Okay, I'll call you up in just 2 seconds. So, Kevin, we're returning to an old tradition of ours, and Ron, I can help you with the lighting piece of it. Not to worry. But no, you don't have to sit anywhere. You're perfect right where you are. You're good. Oh. Hopefully, it'll be worth the climb. It's
the climb.
Very nice. Okie dokie. This off. Okay. Okay, Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom.
So let's start by just acknowledging what actually I'm not sure everybody knows, but we should all be aware of for this evening. So there had been a a threat that was caught by the FBI to synagogues in New Jersey, of which there was then concern expressed to us in New York as well to be extra vigilant. So those that came with us tonight, if you don't, I think there was maybe a police car that was outside, is our wonderful police officers responding to when we asked for just a little bit of extra care. As always, we have our regular security in place. Thankfully, if you don't know the most recent news, they found it was actually one individual in particular, of which they have now arrested and they have in custody. And yes, that's the most recent news of it. So it is believed that the threat is now not a threat anymore. But a reminder to us, of course, that these are serious things, and that we here, obviously, at the temple, we take them seriously. We try as best as we can not to over-respond, to make things, feel intimidating, or quite the opposite, right? Is that we're looking really to not be intimidated, to be here just as you are tonight. But it's also very important to be transparent about when these things happen, and just to know that whenever something does come up, we are always in touch with the local authorities, with the county authorities, with the state authorities, and with national authorities as well. And that we have a really dedicated group of people who are really just focused on these issues as they come up. So you are well taken care of tonight if you are with us, and at home you are, hopefully comfortable wherever it is that you may be. But our focus tonight really is on really celebration of being together. And even in these moments of great challenges, we face them, that we face them with courage, and we face them, as we always have as a community, with resilience. The second thing I will just say is, based upon those that were with us last Shabbat, and we talked a bit about the Israeli elections in advance. And of course, as I indicated, at that point, it was pretty much a fait accompli last week, although some of the particulars of how it played out were quite shocking to see in its totality in the end. But as I mentioned last week, I think there was a lot of interest on having something to gather together as a community to try to figure out sort of what is our understanding of what's taken place, what the outlook is for the immediate future, long-term future, and some of the things that we just need to become more aware of as a community. So just keep your eyes out. We're going to have a program about that. The way that Israeli elections work is that even after the election is over, it's the beginning of the next stage of it, and there are a lot of things that are unpredictable that can happen. So we're going to give a little bit of time for that to play out, and then to try to find some space to unpack and to think about together. So just to put that on everyone's radars. So I know we started out on some of the maybe less ideal notes this Shabbat, but we can start out with something very positive, which is we have Cantor Kevin back with us this weekend. So let's put all of our goodness into the fact that we have our beautiful voice back, beautiful presence. So Cantor, we're very happy to have you.
Happy to be here.
And we're going to start our service by welcoming up our board member and great leader, Rona Klopman, who will be the first volunteer candlelighter again since, I think, roughly the spring of 2019. So, Rona, I can't think of a better person to help us out in this case. If you'd like, I can take care of the lighting piece. If you want to do the blessing piece, that'll be just fine. We're on page 120. Again, page 120.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu lahadlik ner shel Shabbat.
Amen.
Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe, who hallows us with mitzvot, commanding us to kindle the light of Shabbat. Amen.
Amen.
Rona? Couldn't have been.
Sure.
And it's your birthday? Okay.
Wow.
So it's a really
It's
birthday
really
mitzvah.
very good. Excellent. Thanks for getting us back on the right track. Just be careful coming down those stairs. Okay. So we're now on page 130, and we'll begin Kabbalat Shabbat together with L'chu Neranena at the very, very top of the page.
L'chu Neranena, L'chu Neranena, L'chu Neranena l'Adonai. L'chu Neranena, L'chu Neranena, L'chu Neranena l'Adonai. Naria, Naria, Letzor Yishenu, Nekadma Fana Betoda. Naria, Naria, Letzor Yishenu, Bizmirot Naria lo. L'chu Neranena, L'chu Neranena, L'chu Neranena l'Adonai. L'chu Neranena, L'chu Neranena, L'chu Neranena l'Adonai.
We'll turn now to page 131. Shiru El Adonai is just in the top third of the page in Hebrew.
Shiru l'Adonai, shiru shir chadash, shiru l'Adonai, kol haaretz, shiru l'Adonai, barechu shemo, basru meyom leyom yeshuato, shiru l'Adonai, barechu shemo, basru meyom leyom yeshuato, shiru l'Adonai, shiru shir chadash, shiru l'Adonai, kol haaretz, shiru l'Adonai, barechu shemo, basru meyom leyom yeshuato, shiru l'Adonai, barechu shemo, basru meyom leyom yeshuato.
We'll turn to Or Zarua on page 132 at the very bottom of the page.
Or zarua latzadik, uleishrei lev simcha. Or zarua latzadik, uleishrei lev simcha. Bum biddy 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 bum namana 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 nama 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 namana 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 nama 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 namana. Or zarua latzadik, uleishrei lev simcha. Or zarua latzadik, uleishrei lev simcha. Bum biddy 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 bum.
We'll turn now to page 134, Zamru Ladonai at the very top of the page.
Zamru l'Adonai bechinor, bechinor v'chol zimra, bechatzotrot v'kol shofar. Hariu lifnei hamelech Adonai, Yiram hayam umelo, Tever ve'yoshvei va, Neharot imcha uchaf yachad, Harim yiranenu, Lifnei Adonai kiva, Lishpot haaretz, Lishpot tevel betzedek, ve'amim b'mei sharim. Yiram hayam umelo, tevel ve'yoshvei va. Neharot imcha uchaf yachad, harim yiranenu.
We're now on page 135, Romamu, which is the last Hebrew paragraph in the middle of the page.
רוממו אדוני אלוהינו והשתחוו להר קודשו. רוממו אדוני אלוהינו והשתחוו להר קודשו. כי קדוש אדוני אלוהינו רוממו. כי קדוש אדוני אלוהינו רוממו. רוממו אדוני אלוהינו והשתחוו להר קודשו. רוממו אדוני אלוהינו והשתחוו להר קודשו.
We'll turn now to Lecha Dodi on page 138. A reminder, we'll do the first, second, fifth, and ninth paragraphs. For the final paragraph, we will rise in body or in spirit and face towards the rear of the room for those that are with us here in the building. Again, page 138, Lecha Dodi at the very top of the page.
Lecha Dodi likrat kala yaredai 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 pnei Shabbat nekabilai. Lecha Dodi likrat kala yaredai 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 pnei Shabbat nekabilai. Shamor v'zachor b'dibor echad hishmi'anu el hamiyuchad. Adonai echad u'shmo echad l'shem u'letiferet ve'litila. Lecha Dodi likrat kala yaredai 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 pnei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha Dodi likrat kala yaredai 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 pnei Shabbat nekabela. Likrat Shabbat lechu v'nelcha ki mekor haberacha. Merosh mikedem nesucha sof ma'aseh b'machshava techila. Lecha Dodi likrat kala yaredai 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 pnei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha Dodi likrat kala yaredai 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 pnei Shabbat nekabela. Hitoreri, hitoreri, kiva orech kumi ori. Uri, uri, shirda beri, kevod Adonai alayich nigla. Lecha Dodi likrat kala yalalai yalalai pnei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha Dodi likrat kala yalalai 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 pnei Shabbat nekabela. Boi v'shalom ateret ba'ala gam besimcha u'v'tzola toch emunei am segula. Boi chala, boi chala. Lecha Dodi likrat kala yaredai 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 pnei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha Dodi likrat kala yaredai 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 pnei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha Dodi likrat kala yaredai 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 pnei Shabbat nekabela.
Hey, please be seated. Cantor, do me a favor. Push the mic back like a half inch just
Can
away
do.
from you somewhere Yeah, because I think when I said it with the top. Good.
Gotcha.
Okay, we're on page 140, Tzadik Katamar, just in the middle of the page where it indents in Hebrew.
Tzadik katamar yifrach ke'erez ba'levanon iske shetulim beveit Adonai Bechatzrot Eloheinu yafrichu Od yenuvun beseiva Deshenim verananim yiyu Lehagir ki yashar Adonai Turi velo avlatabo.
We'll now rise in body or spirit for the Chatzi Kaddish on page 144 and remain standing through the Baruch Hu on the next page. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabba
Amen.
Ve'alma divrach chirutei ve'amlich malchutei B'chayechon uv'yomechon Uv'chayei dechol Beit Yisrael Ba'gala Uvizman kariv Ve'imeru Amen Yeheshmei Rabba mevarach Le'alam u'yalmei almaya Yitbarach Yitbarach v'yishtabach V'yitbar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh V'yitadar v'yitale v'yitalal Shemei dekudsha b'richu Leila min kol birchata v'shirata Tush bechata v'nechemata Damiran be'alma Veimeru. Amen. We are now on page 146. Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMevorach.
Baruch Adonai HaMevorach le'olam va'ed.
Baruch Adonai HaMevorach le'olam va'ed. Please be seated. We're going to turn now to page 149, and we'll read together in English at the bottom of the page. This is an hour of change. Within it we stand uncertain on the border of light. Shall we draw back or cross over? Where shall our hearts turn? Shall we draw back, my brother, my sister, or cross over? This is the hour of change, and within it we stand quietly on the border of light. What lies before us? Shall we draw back, my brother, my sister, or cross over? Umavir yom umevi laila, umavdil ben yom uvelaila, Adonai tzvahot shemo, Echai v'kayam tamid yimloch aleinu leolam va'ed, Baruch atah Adonai, Amari v'aravim. We'll turn now to page 151, and we'll read together in English at the top of the page. As you taught Torah to those whose names I bear, teach me Torah too. Its mystery beckons, yet I struggle with its truth. You meant Torah for me. Did you mean the struggle for me too? Don't let me struggle alone. Help me to understand, to be wise, to listen, to know. Lead me into the mystery.
Ki hem chayenu ve'orech yameinu, v'hem nege yomam v'layla. ואהבתך אל תסיר ממנו לעולמים. ברוך אתה אדוני, אוהב עמו ישראל. שמע ישראל, אדוני Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Please join us on page 154. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבבך, ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם מלאות על ידיך והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך, למען תזכרו עשיתם את כל מצוותיי והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם, אני אדוני אלוהיכם אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם לאלוהים, אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אדוני אלוהיכם אמת. Let's read together on the top of page 157. Standing on the parted shores of history, we still believe what we were taught ever before we stood at Sinai's foot, that wherever we go, it is eternally Egypt, that there is a better place, a promised land, that the winding way to that promise passes through the wilderness, that there is no way to get from here to there except by joining hands and marching together. As we turn to Micha Mocha on the top of page 158. Yabai bai bim 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 bam, yabai bai bim bam, yabai bai bim 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 bam, yabai bai bim bam, yai bai ba ba ba, yabai bai bim bam, yai bai ba ba ba, yabai bai bim bam. Mi chamocha baim Adonai, mi kamocha nedar bakodesh, nora tehilot osefele, nora tehilot osefele. Yabai bai bim 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 bam, yabai bai bim bam, yabai bai bim 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 bam, yabai bai bim bam, yai bai ba ba ba, yabai bai bim bam, yai bai ba 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 ba, yabai bai bim bam. Balchutecha ra'u vanecha, bokeam lifnei Moshe Miriam zelianu ve'amru, Adonai yimloch leolam va'ed. ונאמר כי פד אדוני את יעקב וגלו מיד חזק ממנו, ברוך אתה אדוני גאל Yisrael. Let there be love and understanding among us. Let peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storms. Adonai, help us to walk with good companions, to live with hope in our hearts and eternity in our thoughts, that we may lie down in peace and rise up, waiting to do your will. Hashkivenu is on the top of page 160.
Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu l'shalom, l'shalom, v'hamidenu malkeinu l'chaim. Ufros aleinu sukat shlomecha, ufros aleinu sukat shlomecha. Amen.
We'll turn now to Vishamru on the top of page 162. Veshamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asot et
השבת, לדורותם ברית עולם. עין עין ביני ובין בני ישראל, אותי לעולם. כי ששת ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ, וביום השביעי שבת, שבת ויהי נפש.
I invite us now to rise in body or in spirit as we begin the Amidah together on page 164. From that point on, we'll continue silently. As always, please go at your own pace, and if at the end you are still standing, you may be seated. Adonai, sefatai tiftach, ufi yagid tehilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips that my mouth may declare your praise.
יהיו לרצון אמרי פי, והגיון ליבי. יהיו לרצון אמרי פי, והגיון ליבי לפניך. יהיו לרצון אמרי פי, והגיון ליבי. יהיו לרצון אמרי פי, והגיון ליבי לפניך. אדוני צורי, אדוני צורי וגואלי. אדוני צורי, אדוני צורי וגואלי, יהיו לרצון אמרי פי, והגיון ליבי, יהיו לרצון אמרי פי והגיון ליבי לפניך, ליבי לפניך.
We'll turn now to page 371 as we offer our Mishaberach, our healing prayer for this evening. Before we do that, we think in our community tonight of Bensi Tepper, Allison Luckman, Malka Bat Chaya Sura, Michael Klinghofer, Amy Cass, Steve Levine, Rivka Bat Rachel, Leah Bat Naomi, Gedalia Ben Sylvia, Lorraine Danis, David Dowling, Sivia Devora Bat Francis, Muriel Hirsch, Michelle Sawicki, Francis Kirschman, Shelley Newmark, Diane Axelrod, Gabriola Spicer, Barbara Kushner, David Kyle Klopman, Lorraine Davis, Talia Pomeroy, Michoel Ben Chananya, Devora Batsima, Rebecca Lila Snyder, Jeffrey Miller, Shelley Lehman, Deborah Block-Kroll, Sylvia Orn, Stanley Rappaport, Karen Layton, Harold Goldban, and Evie Rumello. In addition to the names that we just read out loud, we'll also invite those with us here tonight to share additional names, and of course invite those watching at home to share the names of your loved ones as well. So if you're with us here tonight, we'll start on this side of the room and then work towards this side. We'll join together on page 371 in the middle of the page as we offer our Mishaberach.
Mishaberach avotenu mekor habracha leimotenu. May the source of strength who blessed the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Mishaberach imotenu Mikor habracha lavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen.
Okay, Cantor, you can take a little breather, and to wish everyone a Shabbat Shalom. So I want to begin with a story, and this is one of those stories that I think is true, but I'm never entirely sure if it's true, so we'll take it at face value and assume that it really happened. It is about an actual person who existed, known as the Chazon Ish, which, again, I'm assuming other than Dr. Lenskowski, probably nobody in the room will have heard of the Chazon Ish, but he was one of the very significant rabbis in the early days of the State of Israel and prior, 30s, 40s, 50s, and was a significant influence on the Haredi community, and I'll tell you a little bit more about him after I tell you the story. So it goes as follows. It's election day, and the Chazon Ish is walking down the streets in Yerushalayim, and he meets a certain Jewish person that he knows on the street, and he says to him, "Did you vote yet?" It's kind of like Neil's experience when he asks have you put on tefillin yet? A similar kind of thing, except the question of, have you voted? And the response was, no, I have not voted yet. Why not? Persisted the Chazon Ish. And the person said, well, I don't have the 3 Israeli pounds to pay the poll tax, which was a thing in those days, okay, a thing in our history as well. And that was the answer. The Chazon Ish responds and says, well, do you own a pair of tefillin? And the person says, of course I own a pair of tefillin. And so the Chazon Ish says to him, well, I want you to go and I want you to sell that pair of tefillin and use the funds to pay the poll tax so that you can go and vote. We all follow so far what's going on? Okay. Now, this should be a shock to anyone, especially anyone who is considered to be a leading figure in the Haredi community, to tell another person to sell their tefillin. Not a simple thing. So the Chazon Ish explained later on to Rabbi Soroka, who was a contemporary of his, that wearing tefillin is indeed a mitzvah, but voting in the election, he says, is also a mitzvah. And he says, I was not so worried that this Jew would no longer be able to put on tefillin even after selling his tefillin, because if need be, he could borrow a pair. I am, however, afraid that he won't perform this other mitzvah, voting in the election. Now, this is a remarkable story, again, whether it happened or it didn't. It is certainly a thought experiment to imagine, again, a person of his stature telling another Jewish person to sell their tefillin for any purpose, let alone for the purposes of voting, is not something we should take for granted. And we're not going to focus our attention so much tonight on Israel and more back home and what is coming up next week. And I'll tell you right at the outset, I respect very much that my limitations from the pulpit on what it is that I can and cannot say. So my focus tonight is not on to tell you who to vote for, but to reemphasize the essential quality of voting, not just as American citizens, but as Jews. What does voting mean to us? And it is not as simple a statement as you might assume. Why do I say that? The democracy that we are familiar with, the way in which we vote, the way in which we exercise our power over government in this country and in most countries in the world, is something that would have been a foreign concept to our ancient Israelite partners. That said, there is a stream of thought in Judaism from the very beginning that is tied into the underlying push that leads us to vote, which is our responsibility of civic engagement, our responsibility to engage in that which happens in our name, in our communities, in our country, and otherwise. Now, I should point an additional layer of the Chazon Ish being surprising as a source for the beginning of our conversation tonight. He himself actually was, for really almost his entire life, against the idea of what we would call religious Zionism. He was actually very much an opponent of even some of the original ideas of Zionism, and yet ended up in the land of Israel. Why was he an opponent? Because he didn't like the idea of separating the idea of our religious identity and our national identity. That he believed that these two things are one and the same, and that ultimately speaking, one's Jewish values and Jewish upbringing has an important role to play in one's civic reality. So even though he was living in the land of Israel, which he was conflicted about, he insisted that his followers vote. I should point out, in the case of the Haredi communities in general, he had an opinion as to who they should vote for, and he told them all very much the case. But this story was emblematic, again, of his push to understand that civic engagement was a necessity in the land of Israel. So I want to jump back a little bit and give us a little bit of a textual basis for how we might think about the idea of civic engagement, civic responsibility, and ultimately the things that underpin the idea of voting and elections and democracy and all of that. So we'll begin with, again, one of our great texts, Pirkei Avot, which contains within it a lot of wisdom, but wisdom that sometimes requires some unpacking. So it says in the name of Rabbi Hanina in chapter 3 of Pirkei Avot, that the vice high priest, the second in command ultimately to the high priest in the temple, would say this, to pray for the welfare of the government, for were it not for the fear it inspires, every human being would swallow their neighbor alive. Okay? So the first thing we can say as an initial reaction is, I don't think we generally like the idea of our government and fear as the two words going hand in hand with each other. Should cause us a little bit of discomfort at the beginning. What does that mean? What is Pirkei Avot trying to explain to us? So we'll go to a few commentaries throughout history to try to unpack this idea a little bit further. So the first is from the Talmud, from the section of the Talmud known as Avodah Zarah, which deals primarily with issues around idolatry. And it says as follows. Alternately, there is a reference to an earlier conversation. Just as in the case of fish of the sea, any fish that is bigger than another swallows the other one. And so too in the case of people, were it not for the fear of the ruling government, anyone who is bigger than another would swallow the other. And this is, as we learned in an earlier Mishnah in Avot, which we just quoted, that Rabbi Hanina said, one should pray for the continued welfare of the government, for were it not for the fear of the government, every person would swallow their neighbor alive. Okay, so the idea that's added here in the Talmud is to say that the reason why this statement exists is because if there isn't a fear of retribution, that our natural tendency as human beings is, if we are in a position of power over anyone else, be it for any number of reasons, it can mean quite literally larger than physically, and it can be larger in stature, it can be larger in influence, but when we have that power, we have a tendency to swallow each other up. Should sound somewhat familiar. We'll flash forward a little bit further into the 13th century, one of my all-time favorite rabbis' names. He's known as Rabbeinu Yonah, but he was also from Gerona, so his name in Hebrew is Yonah of Gerona, which always made us in rabbinical school chuckle a little bit, but he's one of the great medieval minds, especially of medieval Spain. And he writes the following commentary. He says, what does this mean, right, that human beings would swallow their fellow alive? This is the matter, he says. It means to say that a person should pray for the welfare of the entire world, and to be pained for the pain of others. So is the way of the righteous, as we learn from King David of blessed memory, when he says in the Psalms, as my friends, as my contemporaries were ill, I clothing became sackcloth. In other words, I wept for them, I treated as if mourning, and I suffered through a fast on their behalf. In other words, I, King David, was affected by the pain I saw in others around me. And so we should learn from King David to act accordingly. And so what does Rabbeinu Yonah say? We should all pray for all peoples that they remain in peace, and through the peace and stability of the government, there will be peace throughout the world. In other words, when we engage in support of whatever government that we are a part of, if its purpose is to instill a sense of peace, sometimes that peace comes through things that also can be a concern about retribution for our behaviors. In other words, the government is that sort of glue that holds us all together and should be treated accordingly, and that we should not have an antagonistic relationship to it, but we should actually pray for the sake of the government so that it does what it is meant to do, which is to hold the community together and to keep people from swallowing each other whole. We'll fast forward a little bit further into history to Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, considered to be sort of the father of modern Orthodoxy, one of the great leaders of that community. And he wrote back in a certain point as an observation, because in his era was the first real period of time in which Jews in Europe and Jews ultimately in the United States and around the world were starting to be given the right to vote. Prior to that, again, most of our existence in exile was one of being limited in every conceivable way. We had no opinion. So first of all, right, you have to put yourself in the mindset of what it was to be a Jew in that time, and to suddenly be confronted with something that was never actually an issue for you, which is, do I even vote? Right? There is a stream of thought in Jewish theology and Jewish philosophy that says that voting and civic engagement, all that stuff, is the stuff of secular things, and that we should be concerned only with studying Torah and doing religious things. And here is a pushback against that by Hirsch, who says the following: to be pushed back and limited upon the path of life is therefore not an essential condition of the exile. In other words, he's saying that the main focus of our experience of exile is not about being limited in some form or the other, but actually the contrary. It is our duty to join ourselves as closely as possible to the state which receives us into its midst, to promote its welfare, and not to consider our well-being as in any way separate from that of the state to which we belong. In other words, that drive that tells us as Jews, especially in those era, that, what is it to us? We're not a part of this culture. We're not a part of this community. People don't treat us well in any case. Why would we engage in this? Why does this matter? We should only pray for the things that benefit us. Why should we pray for this secular body that doesn't even necessarily like us? And Hirsch pushes back on it, and it says that actually our way of thinking is the exact opposite, that we actually have an obligation to engage and to do everything we can to make sure that a righteous government is one that we hold up and that we engage with and that we are active in. We'll fast forward a little bit further to give us a sense of getting us at least closer to where we are today. This comes from Rabbi Moshe Feinstein. Moshe Feinstein, again, not necessarily a well-known name in our world, but was considered to be one of the most prolific, certainly prolific writers of halakha, Jewish law in the 20th century, and is still held up today as one of the great halachic thinkers of time. And he writes as follows. This is 1984. He says, on reaching the shores of the United States, Jews found a safe haven. The rights guaranteed by the United States Constitution and Bill of Rights have allowed us the freedom to practice our religion without interference and to live in this republic in safety. A fundamental principle of Judaism, he says, is hakarat hatov, recognizing benefits afforded us and giving expression to appreciation. Therefore, it is incumbent upon each Jewish citizen to participate in the democratic system which safeguards the freedoms that we enjoy. The most fundamental responsibility incumbent on each individual is to register and to vote. The most fundamental responsibility, he says, is for us to register and to vote. And therefore, he concludes, I urge all members of the Jewish community to fulfill their obligations by registering as soon as possible and by voting. By this, we can express, and this is where the unique piece comes in, why to do it? We can express our appreciation and contribute to the continued security of our community. In other words, the act of voting is not just a question of mitzvah or not a mitzvah, but it's actually a way of us recognizing the gifts that we have been given in this country and actively participating in making sure that it continues to thrive and to function and to the best that it ultimately can be. And that in fact, an act of voting is a principal Jewish act. And it's something that we need to inherently understand. But you have to remember that when Feinstein is writing this, this is not a necessary statement unless there is a large segment of his population that we're planning on doing the opposite, who are not going to vote, who are not going to engage. And he throws down the gauntlet here and he says that it is not just an acceptable thing to do, it is a required thing to do. It is elevated in essence into a position of mitzvah, which, just to point out for those that know in the world of halakha, is not a step taken very lightly. So principally, from the very beginnings, and this is again, whether you realize it or not, I just gave you from every moment essentially in our history, from Torah to the rabbis to ultimately speaking to the relative recent times, a common sense that for us as Jews, especially in an era in which we are given the freedom to vote, to not do so would be an abdication of our responsibilities, not just as citizens of this country, but as proud Jews of varying degrees and various backgrounds and various traditions, from Orthodox to Reform and everything in between. So now I've given you what I hope, even though I know I'm speaking to a room of people who I know are very dedicated voters, on the off chance that you're talking to somebody who's maybe not sure, a little bit of ammunition, so to speak, a little bit of something to convince. But now I just want to give us a little bit of chomer to consider, a little bit of substance to consider as we ask the fundamental question, if we are going to vote, where does our Jewish value set come into our consideration of how we pick a candidate to represent us? And this is the place where, again, from this bima or otherwise, is not my place to tell you in direct sense. But I do want to remind us at least of a few core ideas that I hope will keep us focused again on not just policies, not just parties, but the actual people that we are actually voting for. The human beings who stand in front of us, what they say, what their values are, what they act upon, what we have seen of what they've done before and what they promise to do in the future. These are legitimate places in which we have an obligation to consider and to consider very carefully. To piece this together from a beginning midrash, Shmot Rabbah commentary on the book of Exodus, we're told that as long as one is an ordinary scholar, they have no concern with the congregation, and they're not punished if the congregation lapses. In other words, if you're just a regular, everyday rabbi, apparently I'm not responsible for your behavior, so I feel very relieved of that fact. But if you are going to be appointed the head, to don the cloak of leadership, as they say, you can no longer say to yourself that I live for my own benefit, and I care not about the congregation. But instead to say the whole burden of the community is on their shoulders as leaders. If they see a person causing suffering to another, or transgressing or don't prevent them, then ultimately they are the ones that are held responsible. So what does this mean? Is that we have to think about when we are electing somebody to represent us, that their words and their actions and their understanding of this idea, that they're no longer just a regular person. They have been elected by a group of people, and even by the people who did not vote for them, they now represent. And to speak on their behalf means to understand that their primary function is to be very cognizant, again, of the suffering around them and the people who are perpetrating that suffering around them, and whether or not they are cognizant of how they are meant to respond to that suffering. And I think that one of the things that we have in our day and age is ready access to everything and anything that every candidate has ever thought or said. At this point, we know who they are, but we have to judge them by their actions, their beliefs, and in the end, how they feel about their role as a leader. And are they responsible only to the people that voted for them, or are they responsible ultimately to the entire place that they are responsible for representing? In another midrash, in Tanhuma, we get another piece. If a person of learning participates in public affairs and serves as a judge or an arbiter, that person gives stability to the land. But if a person sits in their home and says to themselves, "What have the affairs of society to do with me? Why should I trouble myself with the people's voices of protest? Let my soul dwell in peace." In other words, leave me alone. If one does this, they literally overthrow the world. That's what the Hebrew tells us. So this is a reminder to us again of the dangers of apathy that says, what does this have to do with me? Or I live in a state in which this vote isn't going to count because everything is one way or the other. That this kind of mentality is the kind of mentality that corrodes from the inside. And while it is a hyperbolic to say that it will literally overthrow the world, the rabbis use hyperbole with a good purpose in mind, which is to say that it's actually not as far from hyperbolic as you might think. Is that all it takes sometimes is that level of internal selfishness and apathy and sort of a disconnection, a disassociation to the rest of the world that we share, that there is a great danger in all of that. And lastly, a warning of sorts that comes from the Talmud from Arachin, and it says as follows, that Rabbi Yehuda Anasi, the great rabbi of his generation, and the rabbis disagreed on how to interpret the following verse. One says a generation parallels that of its leader, and one says a leader parallels that of his generation. So what they're debating, of course, is the question of, are our representatives a result of us, of our society, of our communities, of our world, of our country, and do they reflect that, or are we a reflection of their instruction or their guidance? And I think it's what we say in Hebrew is a gam v'gam situation. It is this and it is that. That, in essence, our leaders are a representation of where we are in our collective ethos, our collective mindset. And at the same time, they have, the potential. We have the potential of overturning that, right? Of showing that if we collectively can envision a world that is one based on justice, on tzedek, as we call it, on mishpat, on the sort of rules of law, on the things that matter the most to us, then we will see that reflected in our leadership. But if we give in to the sort of basest elements of ourselves, if we get into the infighting, if we get into the name-calling, if we get into the insanities and the lies, and we become comfortable in that environment as we have become comfortable in that environment now, if we allow that to become our language and our culture and our society, then almost by a law of probability, the people that we will see taking on the roles of leadership will reflect that. So we have to be aware of the fact that our voting doesn't just matter on November 8th, next week, right? It doesn't matter just on that Tuesday. Our civic engagement matters every single day. Every single day that we live in this country, that we live in this county, that we live in this little village that we love, every day is a call and a charge to us to engage, and to engage in a way that is thoughtful and one that is considerate, again, not just of one opinion, but many, but that always has the idea that our driving goal as Jews is shalom. Is shalem, is shlemut, is wholeness, is peace, is a sense that people can live and wake up in the morning and go to sleep at night, not fearful for their lives, not fearful for their identities, not fearful for the idea that somebody's going to take their life away from them. All the things that drive us need to be a factor not just one day a year or one day every 4 years, but every single day. So I want to leave us just with one piece, which is a prayer, one that was created by the organization known as Truah. And it's simply a prayer that I think gets our focus in the right place. And this prayer, a reminder to all of us to vote. Principally, this entire sermon is really about that. Whatever your conscience tells you, whatever you think, whoever you're voting for, do so with strength, do so with conviction, but do it. Principally, do it. And if you have any trouble being able to do it, this is a time to reach out, to ask myself, ask others for help. We will get you where you need to get to, but it is something that we simply cannot ignore. So this prayer, I hope, will be of some meaning to all of us as we head into next week and to the work that we will do together, one form or the other, however it ends up, together to build, really, again, a country that we can all be proud of. May it be your will, Adonai, in this period of elections, to guide us towards peace. By voting, we commit to being full members of society, to accepting our individual responsibility for the good of the whole. May we place over ourselves officials in our gates who will judge the people with righteousness, as we are told in the book of Deuteronomy. And may we all merit to be counted among those who work faithfully for the public good. Open our eyes to see the image of God in all candidates and elected officials, and may they see the image of God in all citizens of the earth. Grant us the courage to fulfill the mitzvah of loving our neighbors as ourselves, and place in our hearts the wisdom to be understanding those who do not share our views. As we pray during the high holidays, quoting from our Machzor, may we become a united society, fulfilling the divine purpose with a whole heart. And as the psalmist sang, may there be shalom within your walls, peace in your strongholds. For the sake of my brothers and sisters and friends, I will speak peace to you. And together we say, Amen. Shabbat shalom, everyone. Again, we'll rise as we turn to page 586 in our prayer books, and we'll rise in body and spirit again, page 586, Aleinu L'Shabeach. Aleinu L'Shabeach L'Adon HaKol, Atet Gdula L'Yotzer Bereshit, Shelo Asanu Kegoye Ha'aratzot, Velo Samanu Kemishpechot Ha'adama, Shelo Sam Chelkeinu Kahem, Vegor Aleinu Kechol Hamonam, Anachnu Korim, Umishtachavim Umodim, Lifnei Melech Malchei HaMelachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We're on page 591. V'nemar v'haya Adonai lemelech al kol haaretz bayom hahu yihye Adonai echad bayom hahu yihye Adonai echad Yihye Adonai echad u'shemo echad. Our thoughts turn to those who have departed the earth, our own loved ones, those whom our friends and neighbors have lost, the martyrs of our people whose graves are unmarked, and those of every race and nation whose lives have been a blessing to humanity. As we remember them, we meditate on the meaning of love and loss, of life and death. I invite those in mourning, those observing Yartzeit, to please remain standing. Everyone else may be seated at this time. We begin by thinking first of those who passed in our community in recent months. Martin Blake, Lynn Cowan, Faith Diskin, Arlene Eber, Jay Fagan, Ellen Frank, Chaim Bear Greenwald, Mark Joseph, Jane Beard Cass, Gertrude Katz, Buddy Kossoff, Helene Krotman, Emmanuel Kiprios, Leo Leibowitz, David Lieberman, Sandra Luongo, Norma Polsek, Lillian Schwartz, David Sent, Anita Sheldon, Alan Silver, Sandy Slip, Larry Wartor, Peter Weinstein, Rita Weitzman, Matthew Adam Zimmerman, and Yael Zerdar. We also mark the Yartzeits that occurred during the last week for Rose Edelberg, Lillian Bernstein, Caroline Brevitz, Ephraim Cherish, Richard Emanuel, Howard Friedman, Nelson Friedman, Martin Gisk, Marilyn Glass, Robert Green, Philip Haber, Morris Halpern, Dorothy Hipsch, Ralph Caton, Eli Kelman, Hannah Leonard, Edith LaBelle, Seth Lowe, Benjamin Massoff, Sandra Matloff, Ruth Oglensky, Meyer Osofsky, Marion Raff, Irving Rice, Albert Robbins, Sheila Rudansky, Albert Sackner, Herman Schussman, Maurice Sklar, Irving Stebbins, Estelle Steinberg, Irene Treistman, and Joseph Wiener. In addition to those names, if anyone's with us tonight and there's a name that we did not mention, can you mention those now? And I'll invite those that choose to rise, and we'll invite the mourners to join with us on page 598 as we recite the Mourners Kaddish together. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei rabbah.
Amen.
Be'alma divra chirutei v'yamlich malchutei. B'chayechon u'v'yomechon u'v'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael. Ba'agala u'bizman kariv v'imru. Amen. Yehei shemei rabbah mevarach la'alam u'li'amei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yit'aleh v'yithalal shemei d'kudsha berichu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechamata da'amiran be'alma v'imru. Amen. Yehei shalama rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru. Amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru. Amen.
Amen.
Zichronam livracha, may every one of their memories be for a blessing. Please be seated. And Shabbat Shalom, everyone. And again, vote. That's, Andrea wrote me a little note last week. It was a very helpful note. I reminded them last week, but key takeaway for this evening, please do exercise that wonderful privilege that we all have. And if you need some more time to contemplate or to think, Shabbat services tomorrow morning at 9:30, a great opportunity to do exactly that. You can join us in person here at the Whalers Church. If you do, just remember to enter through the side of the building and to come into the chapel space. And those that want to watch online, you're welcome to join us on Zoom, website, YouTube, or Facebook channels. And a reminder to join us for Torah study tomorrow, which, it being the first Shabbat of the month, will be our Torah study using the Torah Women's Commentary. It'll be facilitated by Leah Oppenheimer, who has taken on now the main mantle of the leader of our Women's Torah Commentary Committee. So we're excited to learn with Leah and invite all of you to join with us. A reminder that this Sunday there will be apple picking at the Seven Ponds Orchard in Watermill, a project of the Social Justice Committee. That's at 11 o'clock, so you can join us there. And some of our apples, I believe, will be making their way to the food pantries in much need. And it's a great time, and hopefully the weather looks actually very good for Sunday, I think. So we should be in good shape. So please join us again at 11 o'clock on Sunday. Coming up this week, the Niddah Mitzvah group will meeting at 11:30. Yes, okay. My Heschel class is at 12 o'clock on Zoom. Hebrew School is at 3:30. The Social Justice Committee has its 5 o'clock Zoom meeting. And in addition to that, we will have a meeting for our B'nai Mitzvah families, so those that are expecting B'nai Mitzvah in the next 2 years, of which we now, I think we counted, Shelley, it's 10, I think, between now and next spring that we've got planned in B'nai Mitzvah. So it's a really nice group of really wonderful young people and their families. So we're excited about that as well. And a reminder that on Wednesday, Hebrew School will be meeting at 3:30, and also to note that there will be a board meeting later that evening at 7:30. My Friday class begins at 9:15, focused again on learning about the Siddur and our prayer books. And just to highlight a couple other things coming up in November, on Sunday, November 13th at 10:30, we've been welcomed into the studio of our beloved and very missed Ellen Frank, Zichronah Livracha, who passed away unfortunately last year, but whose work is still continued on by her partner and her husband, Steve. And Steve is kind enough to actually open up her studio, which is in the Springs, and to give us a tour of some of her works and to talk a little bit about her process. So those that knew Ellen well, and those that actually maybe didn't know Ellen at all, she was a remarkable artist and a remarkable part of our community. And so this is a great way of learning more about her work and about really who she was as a person. And Steve has been very generous to open their home to us. So again, that'll be on November 13th at 10:30. I do have a hope and a plan that it will also be possible to stream it for anybody who can't make it there in person. I'm hoping that I can actually work this out and make it work. I will let you know if I can, but I think I can. I feel pretty good about it. Also, a reminder to mark your calendars for Thursday, November 17th at 7 o'clock right here at the Old Whalers Church. It'll be our Interfaith Thanksgiving service, and this will be our first real one in a number of years. And we have clergy representing 11 different communities, 11 different traditions. And thanks to Shelley's work, we're going to have a session beforehand for the teens of our community and the other communities to meet with our various clergy and to get to ask us questions and to learn about our different religions and cultures. It's a really remarkable ecumenical community that we have here in Sag Harbor. So, as it's always been a point of pride for me in the days before COVID, our temple always represented an outsized number of people showing up for this particular service. And it always made me feel really good. Made me feel a little sad for the other communities that they were not able to do the same thing, but on a selfish level, it just meant a lot to be able to see as many people here as possible. So if you're here in Sag Harbor and you can join us, and again, it'll be Thursday, November 17th, 7 o'clock for a service here in the main sanctuary, and then we'll go downstairs to eat, I'm told, pie, which is a good enticement if nothing else, to join us, and it will be streamed live on all of our regular things, so you can join us that way as well. Beyond that, I know that Cantor Kevin has something coming up, and just to remind us what that is, so we can be excited about that.
Yeah, on November 20th at 8 p.m. at Merkin Hall in the city, I'll be performing with a variety of others, many pieces of the work of Salomone Rossi, who was born in 1578, to give you kind of a area of where this is, and he was the first person to compose and publish any kind of Jewish choral music and to illuminate Jewish sacred text. So his first publication, Hashirim Asher LeShlomo, which is music according to Salomone Rossi, is going to be kind of the focus of what we're doing. So there's a lot of HUC representatives that are part of this, and again, that is on November 20th at 8 p.m. in Merkin Hall in New York City. You can get tickets on the KaufmanMusicCenter.org, or they also have a phone number that I can send out, but the event is unfortunately not being live streamed, so it'll have to be attended in person.
Well, we're looking forward to that, and any of our city people, that sounds like a really good night good night out, and especially the HUC connection, which is always a nice thing. Kevin, we wish you the best of luck with all of that for sure. Neil, anything you want to add? 'Cause I always look to you. Reintroduced Shelley. No, people don't know Shelley? Well, Shelley, they don't know. Well, so our newest executive, our first executive director in the history of our storied temple, sitting in the back there, and as always, helping out in every conceivable way. And just for all of us to know and to recognize what lucky people we are, what gifted a community we are to have you, Shelley, as part of our leadership and our way forward. So we're excited for all the things that you're already doing and all the things to come, and we wish you nothing but blessing. And we're going to give you an official installation at some point, but I think we're going to wait until we're back in the building to do that. And speaking of the building, again, lots of great progress. Every week, new things happening over there, and, you know, it's exciting. It's very exciting. John, you saw it earlier today, right? Yep. They're busy. They're busy over there. They're working hard. Good. So a couple of just last pieces before we close, which is, of course, if you're with us here tonight, if you can bring your Siddur back to Josie on your way out, that would be a big help. And, of course, to pick up some challah on your way out. Before we do Kiddush and Motzi, though, we have a closing song for this evening, which we can play off of tomorrow morning. We're going to read from Parshat Lech Lecha. This is one of those great moments in our history in which Abraham is told, get moving, okay? So, again, Lech Lechem to the polls. Make sure. Get yourselves out there, get voting. And yes, Linda, question. Oh, good advice. Thank you.
Great point.
Yeah, this one's really going to, for those of us with small children, this is going to be a fun several days before that adjustment takes place. So, if you need to reach me, I'll be up somewhere around 4 o'clock, I'm sure, for, Neil's going to call me now. That's not good. Okay, Cantor, why don't you give us our closing song? What page are we
Great. On page 645.
645.
You might recognize the melody, and if you do, come up and let me know where you heard it from. Lechi lach to a land that I will show you. Lech lecha to a place you do not know. Lechi lach, on your journey I will bless you, and you shall be a blessing, and you shall be a blessing, you shall be a blessing. Lechi lach. Lechi lach, and I shall make your name great. Lech lecha, and all shall praise your name. Lechi lach, to the place that I will show you. Lesimchat chayim, lesimchat chayim, lesimchat chayim, lechi lach.
We'll now rise for Kiddush on page 123. Make sure my melodies are getting through. I'm getting the festival melody. Can you start me off again?
Vayera, Vayivoker, that
No,
one?
just the
Baruch
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam b'horei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kishanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu v'shabbat kodsho b'ahava uvratzon inchilanu zikaron l'maaseh v'reishit כי הוא יום תחילה למקראי קודש, זכר ליציאת מצרים. הבנו בחרת, ואותנו קידשת מכל העמים, ושבת קודשך, באהבה וברצון הנחלתנו. Baruch atah Adonai, Mekadesh HaShabbat. Amen.
L'chaim.
L'chaim, everyone. Shabbat Shalom. Again, go vote. And also get challah on your way out too, so you have energy. Yeah.
Motzi?
Oh yeah, that's right. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem min haaretz.
Amen. Shabbat
All right.
shalom.
Very good. Go eat.
We'll get back into
Go
things.
eat. Very important. Even then, I still struggle. You know, I feel like you could seal the space station with this. Yeah, no. You know, in my youth in the 80s in the city, you walked around, you always had to have something in your pocket. But now I guess maybe I need to reconstitute that for challah purposes. Just always have some Swiss Army knife and ready. But, you know. Yes, no, I think that's correct.
Thank you. Shabbat shalom.
A lot of rulings were about that. Were about like, you know. Ah.
Thank you. Thank you. Happy to have you here.
Yeah, beautiful. And
Yeah.
this group, I can't. Unfortunately, we're flying back that day
Out of, you know, Pirkei Avot.
to New York. But
You know?
my daughter is a soprano. She teaches music at Shari
Right.
Tefillah.
Oh, okay.
Is this
It's
a
look,
group
that's the
that's
complexities of it. I really,
affiliated with
you know,
something,
I mean,
or
to me the
just-
thing.
So it's
that scares me
affiliated with
most, country like
Zamir.
ours,
Hazamir.
Oh, yeah.
have anything
So
less
with
than
Matthew
like
Matthew
80%
Lazar,
participation
and
in
he's the one
voting
who's
is a
in
shock.
charge and putting this
You know?
group together.
Because at the
So
end of
it's
the day,
his
we don't even
select
really
group
know
of
what it
Man-
is that this
Mantua
country is.
singers.
If that many people
So
are
from
not
like
voting,
it's supposed to be the
And it's like
idea
the same
being
thing with
from
Israeli
the
elections.
town in
If
Italy
you look
called
carefully
Mantua
at it,
where he lived.
one might come away and assume that
So
and even then,
If she were.
combinations of people. The Haredim always there's
Yeah.
a population of them that still won't vote no matter what, but they went up.
Yeah.
And then people who are of a younger age, and
essentially,
especially
yeah,
like
yeah.
Tel
He's
Avivians,
picked
they're like,
3 faculty members
like,
from
it doesn't
HUC
represent
as well as
me,
2
whatever.
students.
I'm not going to pay any attention to.
And then he's
But
flown a few other
but
people out,
what happened in
actually,
this case also was that
from
there
across the
were
US
strategic
to be
decisions
part of
that were
this
made.
concert.
For example,
I believe also
the reason
there
why
might be new
these right-wing
additions
nut
coming in the
guys
few
were
next
able
few
to get
weeks.
in
We're still making sure that the group is
because
completely
they
together,
basically
but
pooled their resources,
um,
right?
it's
It's now
gonna
got
be-
them to
Are they
run
still
on
looking
a
for-
shared ticket.
Sopranos.
So right, no, so but then what happened
so
on
I
the
think
other
they
side
might
was
have just added one
the
more, but
HIT
we're still
basically
trying
was
to figure it out.
campaigning
Yeah.
from the same pool
Yeah,
of people.
so, but
to vote
again,
for
it's in a
them,
few
because
weeks,
if
and
they
it's
got
it's
more
looking to be
seats, they'd have a better
quite a
chance of forming
production.
a government
Because
theoretically.
this
The
music
problem
hasn't,
was
again,
it
it's celebrating
cannibalized
400 years
of the smaller
of it being
parties that didn't
put
make
out,
it in.
so it's just,
And then the way that it
it's
works
very
in Israel is
angelic.
that if you don't make it to the threshold, your votes basically it redistributes. You know. Yeah, he made it in. He's in.
I mean, there are some
He's in.
versions
He is-
on like
that was the last
Spotify
I
or
read is
YouTube,
that he's
not
one of those
that
four.
much out
No,
there.
Yeah. That was the last
and
I
this is
heard most
obviously going to
recently,
be
and
one of the
I think
only
they've counted
performances
almost all the
by
votes, so I think
Jewish
it's
individuals
And look, he's got his work
in
cut out for him. I
Hebrew
mean,
that
that's-
understand what
yeah.
they're singing and how they're singing for a while. The last time it was done, to my knowledge, was 20 years ago by some of the same singers. And so, and this, I think this is probably the last time Mati's going to get a chance to really put it together.
Oh, wow.
But
Oh, amazing. Wow. Well, good luck.
I think
with
it
that.
Thank
I
you.
wish I could
I mean, that's
hear it.
yeah,
really no excuse anymore.
you're flying back
Because you
to.
can do it, at least here.
No, we're here.
You can do
full-time.
it
We're just
early
gonna-
voting, absentee
Ah.
voting.
and then coming back.
Got
But
you.
people find an excuse.
Yeah,
Yeah.
flying
Well,
south
because
of the
it's
war.
also a.
Yeah.
No, because I think there also is like,
Very
there are
fun.
so many rules.
Wow.
Some of
Do you
those
sing
rules
as
are
well?
so specific
I
to
do,
even a
yeah.
county or a location. Like,
Are you
for
the alto
example,
then?
Sometimes just even knowing
If she's
where
a soprano?
I am
place
an
to
alto.
vote, you don't
And,
get
you
that
know, our
thing in the
family.
Because
rabbi,
you know when I just voted this week for the
officiated my,
vote
one of my
about the buying
another
of schools
daughter's weddings and
stuff.
my
So
family,
that was at
everybody
Pearson High
sings
School,
and
but
we
we're in
sang,
North Haven, so for the next election,
this
we vote in
marriage,
North Haven
Eric
Village Hall,
Whitaker, it's based
and it
on
changes
a-
depending
Okay.
on what the vote is and what's
Okay,
taking place.
I know Eric Whitaker.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and- oh, you-
Good place to vote.
Gorgeous, gorgeous. And he voted
Right,
for-
and I think that's
Yeah, for
it's a whole other ballgame. So
Gila Pleitman probably at that point.
Mhm. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
So we sang that, so he
Yeah.
heard us sing. Yeah.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
What's your daughter's name by chance? I'm
Her
wondering.
name is Paige Borden.
Okay, nope, not a name I'm
She's
familiar
at
with.
Shari Tefillah. She teaches
Okay.
music there for a number of years now. So
Okay.
beautiful voice.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She hasn't really done anything like this in so many years. You know, she was in music school.
Sure.
Graduate course. I would love to see her do something like that, but you know.
Yeah, I
you
get
can't
it.
push these things.
Yeah.
Uh,
Sometimes people get stuck in their ways, and everyone comes to
yeah.
it when they get there.
Right. Right. talk, nice to talk to you.
Thank you. You as well.
Yeah.
Have a Shabbat Shalom.
Because then you could have some sense of, you know. But it's not, I don't think, well, I'm very proud.
15 years.
I'm very proud of you for being in that position. That's much more impressive than being a rabbi, you know?
50 years.
God bless.